Look, we have a speaker here, Donna Johnston. She's the Sutter County Registrar of Voters, and she's going to give a presentation because you guys live in Sutter County. You're maybe in for a new paradigm in how you're going to get your votes counted. So without any further ado, Donna, if you'd step up here and take the mic.
Thank you for having me here this evening. Is this okay? The right distance? Okay. My name is Donna Johnston. I am the clerk recorder for Sutter County. I was appointed to the position in 2008 in January, right before the first ever California early primary. So I basically just sat back and watched because it happened a month after I got there. After that, I rolled up my shirt sleeves and started really getting in and figuring out what we're doing and so forth. I worked for the county for a total of 26 years. So I have a background in worked my way up throughout the organization, starting with accounting, and then I moved into being the first ever paid buyer for Sutter County. So I was a woman paid to shop, so that was fun. Then I moved up into the Public Works Division, up into a higher accounting position, or spent a little time over at Mental Health, working as an Administrative Services Officer and helping them with some projects. Then over to IT, and worked in IT doing accounting and some computer-related items, and then was lucky enough to be appointed to the position and then have won election since then. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to talk to you tonight about something that Sutter County's been chosen for, good or bad. Sutter County's been chosen as a pilot. So we're going to go through this little slideshow here so I can give you an idea of what the pilot includes. What we're trying to do is to find out what you want. This is a decision that is to be made by me, not by the Board of Supervisors. And therefore, I wanted to come out to as many places as I could to find out what your thoughts and feelings are about this whole process. So as we go through, I'll explain what the process is and what the change is. So in 2016, Senate Bill 450 passed. And in this, it changes the way that we would vote if we decide to go forward with this in Sutter County. Instead of traditional polling places, it would open up vote centers. These vote centers would be open 10 days prior to Election Day and including Election Day. In this model, every voter would receive a vote-by-mail ballot, and then in addition to vote centers, there would be ballot drop boxes placed throughout the county. New security regulations are also being developed right now by the Secretary of State to enable this process to go forward. So these are the 14 counties that have chosen that have been chosen by the Secretary of State as pilot counties. The ones, I can't really see it too well, but Nevada County has decided to go with this model, and Sacramento County has decided to go with this model. Orange County's Board of Supervisors, since their registrar was appointed, voted it down. So they decided not to do it. Santa Clara, Shasta, and Sierra have decided not to do this as well. Of the others, you can see they're rather small. Inyo's probably the smallest. Sierra is pretty much is vote by mail anyway, so there's no advantage to them to go from their all vote by mail model to a vote center model. So these are the counties that have chosen, and we're in various stages of trying to assess whether we're going to go with this or not. So this is how Sutter County breaks down. In June of 2014, we had vote by mail voting, and we have a lot of people that were voting by mail, and it was about 55%. That increased in November of 2014 up to about 65%. In June of 2016, it jumped to 70%. And we're currently, as of November 2016, at 76% vote by mail for people that have chosen to vote by mail. There are a few, I really try not to take somebody's polling place away, but there are some instances where that has to happen. We cannot get a ADA accessible location to send voters to, or there might be a small island that a voter might be in the county and surrounded by the city, and therefore there are certain parameters that we have to follow to make sure that we do that. But for the most part, most people have chosen to be vote by mail in Sutter County. Here's the turnout by those folks. So on the left, in the blue, that's vote by mail voter turnout, and on the orange is right, and that is people who go to the polls on election day. So as you can see that there's a higher trend of voters that actually vote, who do it by vote by mail. I just wanted to give you an idea of what the demographics were for the county. So back in June of 2014, just less than 30% of people voted. That was the gubernatorial, which is usually a low turnout. And so we had a higher vote by mail percentage there than a poll voter percentage, which was about 8%, pretty dismal. In November 2016, 20% of voters that were eligible to go to the polls showed up on election day, and then we had about a 56% turnout for the people that vote by mail. So what I did is try to compare the two models, so it'd be a little bit easier to try to figure out what we do now versus what this new model would entail. So on the left-hand side, you've got the current model. And on the current model, polling locations are only open on election day. Under the new legislation, should Sutter County adopt it, vote centers would be open 3 to 10 days before election day, and I'll explain that difference as we go through. Right now, a voter would need to go to the polling location assigned to them. Under the new model, a voter could go to any vote center in the county. So for instance, if they lived in a different location, then they could go to that vote center and all the ballot types would be available at that vote center. Right now, a voter receives a ballot for that polling location's area. If you go to for instance, if you were somebody that lived in Meridian and you worked in Yuba City, you showed up at a poll in Yuba City, you wouldn't be able to get your ballot because the ballots are specific to the polling location. So unfortunately, that would make you not have the opportunity to maybe vote for somebody who was running in your area, or maybe a school district that had a school board member on there in the Meridian area, because you needed to pop into a different location. Under a vote center model, any voter would receive their ballot type no matter where they showed up in the vote center model. Again, these are just the percentages. We have 76% of voters vote by mail, 23% currently vote at the polls in Sutter County. Under the new legislation, every registered voter would be mailed a vote by mail ballot 29 days prior to the election. So vote by mail voters can return their ballot currently either by the mail into our office or at a polling location, but only on election day. We do have a little drop box that's in front of our office. Some people do drop that off in there, but it's not used very much. Traditionally, it's people returning them by mail. Under the new legislation, in addition to those choices, you could choose a voter could choose to return it at a vote center or at a ballot drop-off location. So what we have looked at right now, should we go forward with this, we wanted to give you an idea of what that model would look like. So in looking at this, the model that the Secretary of State has dictated that we would follow should we do this would be that 2 vote centers would be open those 10 days before the election and including election day. So you would have one in Yuba City, which would more than likely be our office, and then another one up in Live Oak because that's the next incorporated city. So we would look at those 2 locations and have them open 10 days prior to election day. And then as we got closer to election day, we would open up 3 additional vote centers 3 days prior to election day and including election day. We would add 4 ballot drop-off boxes in addition to the one in front of the elections office, and those would be available throughout the county 28 days prior to election day. The Secretary of State is still writing these regulations. They're making them much more secure than we've had in the past as far as ballot box drop locations and the way that we would handle those and bring those back to the office, the security features around the boxes themselves, and as well as how we transport the ballots back and forth. So they're draft regulations right now. They don't have anything in concrete just yet. So the other thing we wanted to talk about is conditional voter registration. That's your same-day voter registration. Currently, in 2016, we had 200 people that wanted to come into the polls and vote, but it was after that 15-day close period, so we couldn't allow them to vote. We still take their information in. We still get them ready to go for the next election, but unfortunately for that election, they couldn't do it. So we had about 200 people in Sutter County. We took a look at that. Under a new Senate Bill 439, it created people to an opportunity to register after this deadline beginning in 2017. So any elections that are happening throughout the state in this year are under this new, they call it CVR, conditional voter registration. So let's compare this. So currently, if you were somebody who needed to come in on election day, and we stayed with the traditional polling place model, you could come in at the polling place only. You couldn't come into, you'd have to come into our office only. But now under the new legislation, you can come in 14 days ahead of time between that period and still get a conditional voter registration. So in that model, on election day, at the polls, we couldn't accommodate that because the election code doesn't allow for that to happen out in the field. The reason it doesn't allow for that to happen in the field is we don't have any way to verify. Larry and Carla worked at the polls before. They wouldn't have any way to verify who that voter was, who wanted to come, somebody wanted to come in and register to vote and vote. Wouldn't have any information on them whatsoever. So some of you are familiar with the provisional process. You've worked the polls before and you know what a provisional ballot is. A CVR ballot would be somewhat similar to that. So what happened is, in that case that somebody wanted to come in and register that day, we would allow them to register, and then we would issue them a ballot. That ballot would go into an envelope, into a CVR, conditional voter registration envelope, until their eligibility to vote was verified by the Secretary of State's office. Secretary of State's office is the one that allows us to know who's a registered voter. So we would hang on to that ballot, and if the voter was deemed to be eligible to vote, then we would move it forward. But under the current model, if we stayed at the traditional polling place again, that would happen in our office and not out in at the polls. Under a vote center model, we could do it there at the vote center. The reason we could do it at a vote center is because if we went that way, we would have the election management registration system, not the tally system. They're two separate systems. But that election registration system would be at the polls, so we could take a look and verify that person, and then also verify anybody who walked in. So one of the components of this to do is additional outreach if we were making sure that if we went with this vote model. So this would include all these different types of things: radio, social media, newspaper, and so forth, coming out and doing speaking events and engagements and things like that, because if we do go with this model, we want to make sure everybody knows about it. Some of the things that there are flexibility with in this vote model is to offer mobile vote centers. So that might be something that if we decide to go this direction, that we would open up little pop-ups, maybe at a senior center or at another location that it was a little more remote and people that had a harder time getting into towns, say the Meridian area or something like that. So we may be able to open up those locations there. So with that, we want to hear from you. We want to know what you think. We've established an email address. I didn't want it to sound too governmenty, so it's called My Two Cents. So it's my2cents@co.sutter.ca.us. And on the back, I've got a little handout with that email address on there, because we want to find out what the voters want. We don't want to be making this change if the voters don't want this change. That's it with my presentation. I didn't know if you wanted to ask questions now, or you want Ruth to speak and then ask questions. So
let's get up to the mic if you want to ask a question.
Testing. Oh, I have a question. So is this going to increase the cost to the taxpayers since people have to work more hours in the voting polls?
Well, we hire 164 people to work at the polls on election day. Since there's less vote centers, there'll be a little bit of a cost savings there, because although we'll still need poll workers and we'll still need all of you who want to work, they'll be working, in those smaller areas, or smaller locations, but they'll be in it for the 10 days plus the election days, so 11 days ahead of time. So we're still going to need folks, but we won't need as many, so there'll be a little cost savings there.
So this won't increase the cost or the expense of voting?
No, it won't increase it. In fact, San Mateo County looked at doing this, and they started doing this a little bit ahead of time, and that's really what this is crafted on, is San Mateo's model. And they have found that over time, they have decreased costs by about 25% for elections. And when they go to buy new equipment, they have to buy less equipment, less voting equipment, because they're not buying as much equipment to go out to all the polling locations,
Okay.
polling sites.
Thank you.
Yes.
When I came and heard your presentation before, one of the things that struck me is that there is a verification piece of equipment at each polling place, so you can check to see if that voter is who they are supposed to be and that they can legally be registered. Did I hear it right?
You did. So under this vote center model, we would actually have a computer there at each vote center, and in that would be our registration database. When you sign up to register to vote, we scan those images. Those images stay in our election management system. So what happens is we can see that information that you filled out on the card, whether it be electronically or by hand, and then also see your signature. So we can verify your signature right now. And that's a good point, because right now when you go to the polls, and when you come up and state your name and we repeat it back to you, if you're signing your name, we honestly don't know if that's you, because we don't check that signature. And even if we do check that signature under current election code, even if we would have checked that signature, your ballot's already in the ballot box. We wouldn't know whose ballot that was. So I like this piece of it, because if we go with this model, we'll have more security to make sure that Donna Johnston's the one who's coming in and signing, and then I would see on my envelope, when I have my envelope there, we can compare it. And speaking of comparing your signature, if we have any problems with that signature, we're going to challenge the ballot. So if we have any problems with that, we're going to challenge it and put it in a challenge status, and we're going to give you a call and let you know ask you if you really did vote. We don't have to do that. Election code does not specify that we do that. We do that here in Sutter County. I can't speak for other counties, but we want to make sure that it is you that voted and that was your signature. And if its signature is enough difference that we've challenged it, we're going to ask you if we can update your signature. So we'll either ask you to come in, or we'll send you a new voter registration card so we can get that signature updated so that we can get that ballot moving forward. Yes.
Hello.
Sorry.
Hi.
Hi, Andy.
Apathy is the biggest problem we have with voting. If you see foreign countries voting, such as some of the Mideast countries, they stood in line for days so that they could vote. Do you think this is going to reach some of the any more of the people? Our actual turnout versus registered is pretty dismal, so I don't know. Do you think this is going to help that?
The research has shown that people who do get a vote by mail ballot return it more frequently than somebody who needs to take time off work or get into the polls. And in Sutter County, that's what our research has shown as well.
Okay. Do you think you're reaching the younger groups yet? Is there any way to tell?
I don't think we will until you can, biometrically do it or do it through a
Okay, well-
smartphone. The younger demographic is always a challenge. It's a challenge for everybody.
Okay. There are states that have ID requirements to vote in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And according to the law, I think there's an option for requiring ID in California. Do we have?
Well, there is not, we cannot legally ask for your ID when you come to the polls. If you were to present it to us, and we have a lot of folks that do here in Sutter County, we can take a look at it, and we will. But we're not legally allowed to ask for it except under certain circumstances. So if you had registered to vote, yeah, if you had registered to vote, but your information wasn't complete, and the Secretary of State had a question about it, at that point, we'd ask for it.
Okay. Do you see any changes in the rules to actually require ID?
There seems to be a bill every year in every legislative cycle, and there is in this legislative cycle as well to ask for voter ID. At the same time, there's legislation out right now that would still require a voter to state their name and address, but for the elections officials not to repeat it back.
Okay. And with the vote by mail of the DMV, I understand there's a method for bouncing that file against the voter registration so they don't vote. Is that correct?
What happens with the DMV, to our knowledge, is that when somebody goes into DMV and they register to vote, that goes to the DMV database, and then it goes to the Secretary of State's database. They verify it against Social Security, comes back to Secretary of State's office, and then they make that determination and let us know whether or not a voter is an eligible voter or not.
Okay, because you have a special classification for undocumented illegal aliens, as they're known. But is there a way to automatically purge those from the file of registered voters?
Well, I think the challenge is first to identify the individuals.
Okay, all right.
So, what we do here,
You're restricted.
yeah, what we do here is anytime we get registrations in, we get changes daily. We're making daily registration changes. The health department's next door. They'll bring over their information to us for anyone who's passed away. We check the newspaper. We're constantly working on cleaning up our rolls, and we want them to be right.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I also lived in Chicago, so it's vote early, vote often there.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, half the gravestones are registered voters. Yes. Thank you very much, Don.
You're welcome. Yes.
Making sure this thing is working. In September, the California is supposed to bring out the new driver's licenses where you have to verify that you were a citizen. The real voter ID, I believe it's going to be called. How are you going to be able to cross-check that against your database? That's about 28 million new licenses in California.
It is. And in fact, that is also something that's caused a lot of people to come in and get a passport because the TSA may not allow those anymore when you travel. Because they've been allowing that. That driver's license was never intended to be an actual identification, but it's been used. It's been used as an identification for years. The new one will be verified. We've been told it's been going to be verified against the Secretary of State's database. We made a change a couple of years ago, so. Each county used to own their own database. We still technically own our own database, but we feed information into the statewide database. And when that happened, it cleaned up a lot of duplicates, people that were registered in one county but didn't change their registration or let another county know that they had moved from one location to the other and that type of a thing. So we're looking forward to that, that difference in that driver's license because we've been told that the different numbering sequence is enough, but honestly, we want to make sure that it is.
Hey, Donna, over here.
Oh.
Thank you for all the work that you do because you're a true professional, and I would like to let you people know I have full faith in what Donna does. Very rare for me to say that.
Thank you very much.
But I believe her to be very honest, sincere, and it takes this job very, very seriously. And one of the rarities in California, as you know, and we've been dealing with the whole issue of voter fraud and everything on Agenda 21 Radio for a long time. Katie Grimes has done some absolutely stellar work for Agenda 21 Radio and also the United States. The key thing, and I heard you talk about this because in California we have the issue of the motor voter issue, where everybody goes in, if you're an illegal alien, and get your driver's license, and then you're asked to pick a party, basically. Now, my understanding, and maybe you can clarify this, but my understanding is that the Department of Motor Vehicles does not share their database with Alexapedia. Now, is that still a fact that you know? Because, in fact, what happens is that just opens up the door for voter fraud, as we know, which has been ongoing. So I want to make sure that we're clear on that, they are still refusing to tap, or the DMV is refusing to give up that database information, thus providing providing fraud, or the avenue for fraud. And I see Ruth over there. Yeah. But just to clarify for everybody, that's where a real hang-up is. And that's where the real corruption, part of the corruption lies in California. But I guess, so is that true?
That is true. And in fact, Senator Nielsen in Butte County, the Butte County Registrar and myself have been talking to him about, and he's bringing legislation forward to hopefully change that. If not change it, at least get that conversation started, make people aware of the fact that they're not talking to each other.
Right, and that's one of the reasons I talk about it all the time on the radio show, because we've got to get these people to talk. If we have any kind of hope for California, which we're going over the precipice right now, that if we can straighten up these voter rolls, that'll be a great thing. Now, the other question is about the President's Commission on voter fraud. And the President got a commission together. I know he was out here in March. I was invited to the meeting. I didn't go. But I know that there were some pretty good results of that meeting. Have you seen any kind of results from your end, and have you turned over information to the President's Commission?
We have not. We've not been asked to turn over information. We were just at our conference last week, and we had a speaker that used to work with Pew, the Center for Research, and he's now out on his own. And he was saying to us that of the 2 Republican Secretary of States that are on the commission, they themselves are not turning over the data. I don't know. So, yeah, but we have not been asked. And I don't know that the counties will be, but it's right now it's laying with the Secretary of State's. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
But it just seems like that you're making it more convenient for people to register at the last minute, which liquidates the voting base, which seems to enlarge the fraud also. With the amount of voters, there's an amount of fraud. And it just seems like we want the voting system to move into a direction of responsible voters. I mean, like property tax measures and things like that. That should concern property owners. I mean, I'd like to see a direction, not just voter convenience, registration convenience, and able to vote, but responsible voting. I mean, why do we have people that are non-property owners voting on property measures that increase our taxes when they don't have responsibility for, paying the tax? I mean, it's not coming out of their wallet.
Right, and it's the law. It's just we have to follow the law, and that's the way the law is set. So I encourage anybody who doesn't like what's going on out there to get the laws changed if possible.
Is there any talk of it curtailing voting responsibility? I mean, tax measures based on the people that pay taxes?
Well, there's a few smaller elections that are based that a person has to be a registered voter and a property owner for certain types of elections. The levy district election that we had a few years ago, in order to be, if you're in levy district 1, you had to be a registered voter and a landowner to vote in those. Those are called landowner elections. So there are still landowner elections in California, but they're not. Those are generally the ones that you don't see happening in June and November.
Now, the voting ballots, everyone is verified. Everything is checked out one
Yes.
by one. It just doesn't go through a computer and fit out.
No, we're small,
Yeah.
so humans are touching everything. I sent all of my staff, including myself, through forensic signature handwriting verification training. I'm on the certification and training. I'm the co-chair for the state of California, which helps get all of the gets people in the elections certified. And so I decided that would be a great thing to roll out throughout the state. So we rolled it out throughout California and got about 600 people trained. And I brought in even people that work for us part-time, that come back every election, that are going to be working on those signatures, and I brought them in because I wanted them to get trained as well.
Last question, please.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm just wondering, you have a registration base. How do you know how many of them that are already registered are actually citizens?
We don't. I mean,
Well,
the information that we get is from the Secretary of State's office. No county registrar makes that determination. We're going on the trust and faith in the other system.
Well, the trust and faith doesn't seem to be working. So my question is still not answered. How do you know who is really a citizen and not? That is even on the registration.
It's extremely difficult to know that. I mean, I'll be completely honest with you. It's extremely difficult to know that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.